According to economist and academic Professor Daniel Meyer, South Africa has about 7 years to avoid becoming a failed state. Speaking to City Press, Meyer said South Africa is currently a vulnerable state, but could very easily become a failed state by 2030, where important political and economic systems could collapse to the point where the government has lost all control. Meyer said that critical systems in the country as it stands, such as service delivery, economic growth and equitable development, are hanging by a thread. Using his own methodologies, the professor determined that South Africa's a failed state score was just under 510, pointing to a middling situation, but stressing that the outlook was negative. If the situation doesn't improve in 7 years, things could look much worse. Meyer's methodology has its roots in the Fragile State Index. While there is no definitive definition what failed state, a broader analysis failing countries defines it as nation with sovereignty but experiencing the collapse political power, the rule law, and civil society, pointing to anarchy. The Fragile States Index, prepared by the US think tank Fund for Peace, tries to measure a state's risk of failure by looking at indicators in social, political and economic segments. These include demographic pressures, loss of skills through brain drain, civil unrest among social indicators, inequality, increasing poverty in economic sectors, a collapse in public services, human rights, the rule of law, a growing schizophrenic elite when it comes to state legitimacy. Many of these indicators have worsened for South Africa in recent years. The latest index for 2022 places South Africa at 79th out of 179 countries, here higher ranking, higher risk of state failure. This position is worse than 89th 2021, 115th in 2012 and 132th 2007, South Africa's best position on the list. By comparison, Zimbabwe, which everyone fears, sets plan for the course of South Africa, it ranks 15th in index. The warning that Meyer from South Africa is heading towards a failed state joins a growing list of comments that have said the same thing over the past 2 years. Water shortages, and other service delivery failures that continue to plague the country. Earlier this month, MTN Group CEO Ralph Mupita said South Africa would face becoming a failed state if the government did not effectively address the load-shedding crisis. The South African Institute for Risk Management said South Africa risks becoming a failed state if its lack of determined, ethical, courageous leadership continues and no steps are taken to improve support economic growth. If South Africa continues to experience a sustained unethical and legal principles, unmanageable social unrest and collapse of the rule of law, a complete economic will become almost inevitable, IRMSA said. Former Treasury Chief Executive Dondo Mogajane warned in 2022 a culture of self-enrichment among some South African politicians and public officials is leading to deterioration of trust in government and that signs are beginning to emerge the country is a failing state. This was echoed by Professor Bonang Mohale, a business leader and rector Free State University, who previously said current socio-economic realities of South Africa, as well as disclosure widespread corruption over past few years, is a sign. Sibanye-Stillwater Neal Froneman had also previously heavily criticized the government, saying that the lack of reliable leadership meant that South Africa was a de facto failed state. While all these warnings paint a grim picture for country, they all come with a message to South African government that it is time to change course and make an impact using voices of South African people. The government does. In particular, Traitor said South Africans must vote for credible leadership and collectively reject corruption, no matter how small, in order to change direction. Read another warning that South Africa is at risk of becoming a failed state.